Welcome to the Panza Panza Forum. In the Yoruba language, the word panza is usually injected into poetry to express an uncomfortable, uncensored, and inconvenient truth. The Panza Panza Forum is candid conversations about the life of African immigrants in America as it relates to their adaptation to their new home. While some may find it easy to integrate and can balance between retaining the original African culture while accepting the culture of their new home, many continue to struggle to find a balance between both worlds.
Hello and welcome to Panza Panza Live. This is a podcast where we discuss the lives of African immigrants and their assimilation into Western society as they raise younger generations in a country that is quite different from their own. We also explore the experiences of children of immigrants as they balance the African and Western cultures. We present to you this informative, interesting, and expansive dialogue about the intricate experiences of African immigrants in America.
Welcome to Panza Panza. I'm your host, Kemi Seriki. Today I'm having a conversation with Dr. Boukary, Sawadogo, an Associate Professor of Media and Communication Arts at City College of New York. He's also an author of a new book to be released on June 7, 2022, titled African in Harlem, an Untold Story, New York Story. Am I right?
Yes, you are right. Africans in Harlem, an Untold New York Story, coming out June 7th.
So welcome to Panza Panza, Dr. Boukary Sawadogo. I'm so delighted and thrilled to have this conversation with you, to come on my platform to talk about your book and to talk about many other things as well regarding African immigrant experience in America. So as I always ask my guests, can you fully introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about your background to our audience as to where you were born and where you spent most of your childhood and adult life.
Okay, I'm Boukary Sawadogo. I was born in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, for Burkinabe parents. At 5 years old, I was sent back to Burkina Faso to live and study with my grandparents because my parents, the idea is that if you stay with your parents, you won't learn the real life. So let us send you back to the village so that we will prepare you for the real life. So Burkina Faso, that's where I did elementary school, secondary school, and also part of the university up to my second year, sophomore year. And sophomore year, I got a scholarship. I went to Dakar, Senegal, where I did my bachelor in foreign languages applied to tourism and business. So English was back, foreign language was English and German. Mm-hmm. But I lost all my German now. I came back to Burkina Faso, couldn't find a job, so I was moonlighting, tourist guide, conference interpreter, translator, English teacher. I think destiny had it at the time that I passed the national competitive exam to be a diplomat. And I finished the training, and as I was finishing the training, I had an admission to a U.S. university with full scholarship to do a PhD. So I had to choose, and since I'm already here, so you already know what the choice I made. Mm-hmm. But obviously, people said that we never seen in this country someone who has finished their training to be a diplomat and just leave to go study again. So
So when you came, you just went into PhD program and under your specialty?
No, when I came, I did a master's program first before going the PhD. Obviously, it was not directly because back home I initially did foreign languages and then I did diplomacy, and my specialty at that time in diplomacy was geopolitics. So geopolitics and cinema was later different.
So what makes you go into cinema?
To be honest, I'm currently writing my memoir, maybe too young to write a memoir, but I usually say that Black male don't live longer, or even when you are on the continent. So I decided film because while I started writing my memoir, I'm thinking back, I try to excavate how did I come to African cinema. And going back, I realized that when I was very young, living with my aunts in when I left the village to come to the big city, living with my aunt. I remember that was the first time me being accustomed to images. That was television, because at the time, television, we didn't have a national television broadcast for the country. It's only regional for our city. So it started at 6:30 p.m. and then at 10:30 p.m. shut down.
Shut down.
Yes. So I remember, So I would remember I would always sneak out to go watch TV. Obviously, when I come back home, I will get the belt sometime. So, but for me, it started with that. And then when I moved to Ouagadougou, the capital city, you have FESPACO, the Pan-African Film and Television Festival of Ouagadougou. So by an annual edition, and I was just living, studying in that atmosphere of African cinema coming to town every 2 years.
Yeah. So did you just focus your PhD on Francophone studies in cinema, or you diverse to Anglophone as well?
African cinema, because if you take African cinema, there is no field in the US where you can go and study African cinema. Even on the continent, sadly, maybe you have 1 or 2 or 3 departments maximum. Wow. So, yes. So here, either you may go to foreign languages, you may go to English department, and maybe media. But media, you have few of us that are in media department. So I had to go through Francophone studies, but my work is not limited to French-speaking Africa. No. Extend beyond that, yes.
Yeah. Because during African Film Festival in New York City, I've always been impressed by African talent in storytelling from diverse film producer from different parts of Africa, especially Ousmane Sembene, the grandfather of African film, including various African film producers in different parts of the continent. One thing that I see is that with the Francophone-speaking films compared to English-speaking films, we focus more on telling our stories through the European language. What do you think of that?
Yes, true. You have some differences between English-speaking and French-speaking Africa, but more and more they're converging than diverging. It comes from the funding mechanism, how the funding mechanisms are built in French-speaking Africa, so that the author, the filmmaker has to conform to the rules set by the funding organisms, which most of the times are located in the global West. So which means you have to make a film or write a script or screenplay that they might find interesting to fund, not necessarily how you want to make it. So that's how sometimes we see films that are more geared toward the European canon, the European audiences than Africans audiences. You have a part of African cinema, which is Nollywood. I used to say the new, but it's not new. It's almost 30 years now. It's no longer new, which came up with a very different and interesting model, popular and commercial cinema, which is a grassroots grown and didn't need Nigerian government intervention early on. So, which means that in terms of freedom, in terms of sovereignty over the creative process, they have control over that, which means they're more like they have been producing films that audiences really connect with and identify with local stories. But that model has been spilling over to many African countries. You have Ghana with Gollywood. You have Bongo Wood in Tanzania. You have River Wood in Kenya. You have different, even my own country, you have directors. I can take the example of Boukary Diallo, who is really focused on popular genre cinema. Last October, I was back home for FESPACO edition. And I'm delightfully surprised to see you have on private TV stations, you have Nollywood channels with movies dubbed into French. So that tells you, that's what I'm saying. You have the differences, but are more and more converging than ever before.
Yeah, because the film that they're producing now, compared to the storytelling process, has really changed. And I see more of African film that tend to imitate the West or the Europe, compared to the producers, the grandfather, like I said, Usman Sembene, whose line of storytelling is much more on intellectual level. I won't say the new ones are not really intellectual, but they focus more on history. They focus more on injustice. They focus more on the struggle of Africa, and they tell the story through the African language. Because for me, when I watch many foreign films, they actually tell the stories through their own language. And I see the beauty, listen to the beauty of those language as an audience. Even though I have to actually read the subtitle, which I don't really mind, but actually listening to that language. As a professional in a film, I'll call you a film critic in African film production. What is your opinion on that? Even though I just want to find out your opinion about us actually telling our story through French or English, rather than using the African dialects in telling our stories. Because like I said, I've been watching many stories from different parts of the world. The recent one that I was watching on Netflix came from Egypt. And it was all the way to 20 episodes, each one of them for almost 1 hour. But it was done in their own dialect, in their language. You have to read the subtitle. And it allows me to really appreciate the language that was being spoken, which in this film was Arabic language that was spoken. I just want you to shed light on that, if you can.
Yeah, you mentioned Egypt. I was in Egypt in February as a dual member of the festival. Okay. So yes. So in terms of language, why in African cinema we still have films that predominantly use the colonial languages of English and French or Portuguese. I think that for me is something that is built into the distribution channels. So exactly who are your target audiences when you make a movie? This is a question that should be asked of directors. Because if you are thinking, I'm just making a movie to make a quick buck, to make money, so you thinking, okay, I'm going to make it in English or in French so that cable television will pick it up, Netflix will pick it up. That's, that's one of the explanation, which means you are focusing more on the business part. I'm not saying the film is not business, but you're focusing more on the business part. But even that is not an excuse, because earlier you mentioned the example of Sambene. If you see Sambene, many of his movies are in Wolof. But that doesn't take away the universality of its message. It doesn't take away the original film language that it brings. So which takes us back to a very question which I always ask when I'm doing training on the continent. I always ask young or aspiring directors, what made you come to cinema? Why you coming to cinema? And sometimes they cannot articulate that answer. Because if it's to make money, you can make money so many ways. If it's to make a name for yourself, you can make a name for yourself in many ways. Here I'm pointing toward to the larger point of maybe with technology are open the access to cinema so that everybody can make a film. But without sometimes mastering film language, and why do you want to use the film medium? So which means that maybe we have to go back to film schools to learn certain things that a medium, you cannot just use a medium because you have access to the technology. You must have something to say. And how do you say it is very important.
Thank you so much for that. And like you said, the producers or the filmmakers, their focus could be about making money, but not having impact on the changes or giving message to a certain population of audience that may actually see something tangible about this culture. Because it's like everybody now have camera to produce movies. Everybody now, have story to tell. But compared to before, whereby you have some kind of background knowledge of what you really want to talk about. It's not something that you just want to, copy Hollywood or, whatever story they're producing in Bollywood and then bring that up and say, oh, we could do the same thing in Africa, but, what image are you portraying as well for the continent? So that's just what I wanted to bring out. So I know that in 2020, you launched the first animation film in US, which I believe was called Harlem African Animation Festival, devoted to animation film and series of Africa. Since the project came during the COVID, many people may never heard of it. So would you like educating our audience about what this project is all about?
Yeah, this project launched it 2019, and the first edition was initially scheduled for May 9th and 10th, and everything was ready 2020, and sadly you have COVID that hit, but yet I was able to have the first edition online early December 2020. So why animation festival? Because animation is one of the oldest, I would say oldest film practice on the continent. Oldest film practice on the continent, because the oldest film industry on the continent is Egypt. You go to Egypt, we're talking here about already animation in the 1930s. So it's really the oldest, and yet it's one of the less spoken about and the less critically acclaimed. They get less awards and less critically acclaimed, but yet it's one of the fastest growing practice. The oldest, and yet one of the fastest growing practice, more than live action movies on the continent.
Oh, wow.
Right now on the continent, you have two. You have gaming and animation. Those two are growing exponentially. So there is a potential there. And for me, I wanted to bring it, to make that connection between Africa and the diaspora, because through animation, you have a lot of storytelling. I don't want to say unlike live action films, but most of the animated films and series in Africa stayed very close to traditional African storytelling. And through that, I see something not only, I don't want to say preservation, transmission of knowledge, transmission of culture, and also maybe help anchor our own identity here in the diaspora. So that's why for me, animation is one thing that I thought, I should have it in Harlem here. There is no better place than to have it in Harlem here. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't go out to other places. And also one way also to create dialogue and conversation between African immigrants and the Black diaspora.
Oh, wow. That is so wonderful. I can't wait to see that because, as you know, I love storytelling, traditional.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to invite you for
because, I remember when I first started telling stories in New York, and how I got into storytelling was because of my children. They were in school. And I want them to be able to connect with their roots, even though they were born here. So during the Black History Month, they have Black History celebration. So I said, I'm just going to incorporate storytelling. And that's how I started doing the storytelling. And initially they said, are you going to bring some other, puppets kind of thing where you wear puppetry to show the kids? I said, no, we don't do that. I said, we don't do that, but my voice and the way I present it, we actually engage the audience. So that's part of our tradition. Because before the invention of television, people listen to stories. When you go to the village, when I was growing up in Nigeria, when I go back in the village, whereby there was no TV, nothing electronic over there, I listened to the elders telling the story, whether the great-grandmother or the great-grandfather. And if the story was not being told in your compound, you go to another compound to listen to the story. And it was so engaging. And I think this week will go far. And you actually focusing it on the tradition will be really to preserve our tradition and our culture of storytelling. That's so great. So at City College, you teach cinema studies and Black studies?
Yes, I do.
So can you briefly explain to our audience what combination of that in those two areas, how it came into being?
How it came to be, initially my training is cinema, and when the college was looking to make hire, I think initially was for the Black Studies program, and since a program cannot make hires at the university level, so it has to be a department, and the Black Studies department worked with the Media and Communication Arts department. So when I came, I still have a dual appointment. My own department is Media and Communication Arts, but I'm contractually obligated to teach one class for Black Studies every semester.
Oh, wow.
So I'm fully, yes.
Are you teaching what focus of Black Studies? Are you teaching about the introductory part of African American Studies?
No, it's this is more like 300 level courses, which is I develop my own courses for that, and I can give you the free courses that I've developed for that program. One is African cities, where I explore African cities. Mostly for me is to push against the media representation of Africa as backward, disease-driven and everything. And I want to say, hey, you think of modernity, you think of cities. You know what? The really modern and biggest city in Africa that you would think. So, and the second class is African cinema, gender and culture, where I explore the place and the role of women in African cinema. And there is another class called Parallel Movement, where I compare African cinema and African American cinema.
Oh, okay. That's great. That is so good. So what would you say about both two sides, African cinema and African American cinema? Because during the African Film Festival in New York City, initially it was mainly African films, but now they incorporate the Caribbean film as well. Some of these vendors also incorporate the Caribbean films, and they also incorporate African American films. What do you think of those collaborations together?
I think you have two festivals. I don't know if you're referring to two festivals. You have the New York African Film Festival by Mayen, and the African Diaspora International Film Festival.
Yes. That one, I think they actually use Columbia University.
Yes, Jara. Yes. Are you referring to
both of them? Because I know the first one, it focused more on African films.
Yes, New
York African film, and then the second one actually focused on the diaspora.
Yeah. So I think that the question here is, I wanted to kind of zoom out and give a larger view, because the larger question is, what are the venues, the vehicle for African film distribution in the US? Usually you have what I call the academic route, which is me as a scholar, I invite an African filmmaker who will come screen his or her film and then take questions, and that's it. And the second is the festival. And usually the festival will either focus on the larger category of Black or Blackness. It's within that category you have African cinema, but also they bring the Black diaspora cinema. Yeah, and then you have a circuit of distribution, which are private distribution companies that distribute on DVDs. But more and more, we are in the area of streaming. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So I know you've come across many of your students who may want to pursue that career in African films or Black films in later on in their life. Have you come across many who show interest in that, especially African students that you may have in your classrooms?
Probably still, 2 or 3 that I know have gone into media distribution, because usually the courses open the gateway to more exposure to African cinema and for them to develop an interest. Yes, I have 3 students who have gone on to go into distribution of African cinema. Yeah,
and I know many of our students, sometimes they struggle in finding what area of studies they should go through, whereby the community, the parents might say, oh, go and focus on this. And if they come and say, oh, I want to focus on cinema, the member of the community or the parents might not understand. What do you mean cinema? What do you do with that? What kind of job are you going to get? So those are the kind of dialogue that could take place at home. Now let's dig into your upcoming book, Professor Sawadogo, African in Harlem, an Untold Story, New York Story. So when I saw your email, I was so happy to see it because Harlem is actually my place. I hang out there at least in a month. I could go 2 or 3 times. And most of the time I usually go to the African market because I know quite a few of sisters and brothers who actually sell at the market there. So sometimes, to the extent I could sit down there for hours, just chit-chatting, going from one store to the other store, to talk to them. So can you tell our listener what inspired you to write this book, focusing on Africans in Harlem? As many who may be listening may know that Harlem in itself is a manifestation of Black Renaissance since 1920, which was not only limited to revival of African-American culture in music, dance, and theater, but intellectual and political movement as well. So what motivates you to writing this book?
I would say 2 reasons, but I'm glad that you mentioned the African market because it is right next door that the idea was birthed to write. You have missed Harlem. That was really, close and next door to the African market. When I was hired by City College in 2015, that's the place that I knew Miss Harlem to go there in the cafe, just to study and start working on my course materials. And I explained in the introduction how the idea was birthed, the idea of the book. I was there, sitting on my computer, working, and you see one of those New York bus, it's kind of a tourism bus, kind of a double-decker that kind. So one pulled out on the other side of the street and the tourists start coming in. And I heard this woman who was on the phone that she's on the Jewish history tour of Harlem. And you have to put yourself in my shoes. I came not even, a month. And I'm like, Jewish history tour of Harlem. I'm like, I don't, for me, before coming to Harlem, the narrative is about African American. I'm not saying I don't mean to erase the Jewish history of Harlem. It's simply I didn't know. Yes. So, and then I started thinking to myself, but I see a lot of Africans here. So are there any tour of Africa or African history? That's the idea. And I just Googled right on the spot, there is any. And I'm like, maybe, I would be interested to learn more about this. And then I start talking to friends, first friends I made. And we're like, there's, the community is really growing. But nobody is able to give me the answers I want. Like, how exactly did the community start? Why did they pick Harlem out of the different places in New York they could go to? And how come that it's the French-speaking West Africans that make up the majority? And, a lot of questions. So that's how the book started for me. And the second reason is I was curious enough to poke around. Something caught my attention. It is how African immigrants has contributed to the renewal, to the renaissance of Harlem, and yet they're not part of the narrative of Harlem. Apart from, in terms of monuments, in terms of something physical, apart from the African Square on 125th, you see the air braiding salons and everything, but the city or the neighborhood hasn't really memorialized the African presence. And yes, the community is one that contributes economic and culturally. And I said something needs to be done, and I'm happy I did it because later on I came across statistics. Statistics of in 2015, sub-Saharan African immigrants have contributed 55 billion to the U.S. economy 1 year alone. So which means that you have African immigrants, be it in New York City or across the country, who are contributing tens of billions of dollars to the US economy, but yet they're not part of the larger narrative, they're not part of the conversation. They have very limited political leverage to defend their own interests.
Yes. And that miss that you mentioned, African market actually extended to that miss.
Oh, Miss Harlem.
Miss Harlem. African market was extend to that miss. Then they cut it off to build that building. Because at that time, many of the traders at the Betty Shabbat Center, which I will call African market, many of them, they had to squeeze them in. They cut it in half. Then they developed the building. So they were all afraid that they were going to be taken away from them because previously they were on 125th Street.
Yeah.
Selling on the street. When Giuliani was mayor, and then I think, I'm not sure whether Dinkins was, at that time, but, it was all on 125th Street. Many of these women traders, they bring their stuff and they're selling it on the street before they move all of them down. And there's still one brother who still continues to be on 125th Street. I forgot his name. He has a store there on 125th. I forgot his name, and I'm not sure which part of Africa he's from. And he still sells his stuff. And he was telling me the rent was so humongous and high. If he had known, he could have bought the building himself.
Too late.
When they were selling it for cheap. So, and I'm glad that you mentioned how Africans actually contribute to Harlem, not only in terms of the culture that they brought in. Because before many of these people migrated, you can hardly find African drummings. Here, braiding wasn't that common. And when they came in, Africans started coming in, especially the Francophone Africans, because of the language barrier. Many of them, women took into braiding. I remember going into some of these shops for hair salon, and you see many African women braiding hair for African Americans. And the connection right there. Sometimes when I go into the braiding hair salon, they want to do their prayer. They go and do their prayer. When they want to eat lunch, they just put it in a big tray and they ask the customer, come and eat. Many African Americans who are the customers are looking, wow, we're going to dig our hand inside. Yes, that's how we
Yes, you do.
That's how we're going to introduce you to the culture, back home. So that connection, I'm glad that your book is able to talk about that extensively. So I understand the extensiveness of research done before you put this book together. Did you also include other personal stories of diverse group of African immigrants in Harlem, including the traders, the restaurant owner, the cab driver, the white-collar workers? Because not all Africans are having business. Many end up going to school, even though the language barrier for many Francophone Africans who are coming here, whereby they have to learn English, then go to school, is a lot of challenging that comes with that. So do you also include those personal stories in your book?
Yes, I do, because I first delineate the migration wave to Harlem, African migration wave to Harlem, because you have first what I call the more intellectual, wave, which you have the 60s, the 70s, and the artists, the dissidents. And then you have the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. These are more economic migrants and mostly uneducated, or if educated, sometimes they come and they have trouble getting the job, at least, that they used to have to, or the equivalent. So I'm talking about all those from the hair braiding salon to the restaurants and to women, which are delved into women, because I think this is a city where you need a true income to function and as a household, and women sometimes have to get a job, and sometimes not the one that easily is available. And also you have in terms of more and more, I'm talking from the 2000 onward, you have more and more single women come. And what I've learned from communities, African immigrant communities, it's very difficult for women to get housing and jobs. Men easily, when they come, they will get a job, but women takes time. Yeah. So I delve into all those, and also give also a little bit of historic context to African presence in Harlem through different research at the Riverside Church, because they have what they call the apartheid, because we're very involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and we have archives, and also there is a project, there used to be a project in Harlem here that's wanted to make Harlem the gateway to America in terms of business, because we wanted to have a World Trade Center for the third world here. From the 80s through the 90s, you have African president who will come to Harlem systematically. And even today, we continue to have the same pattern where Africans president come to the UN General Assembly, and you have to make a trip uptown to meet with your community. And I say usually it's for electoral reasons or to have a photo op. Yes.
So what would you say attracts Africans to Harlem? Especially mostly Francophones, and what are the most populous group of Africans in Harlem? Is it Senegalese?
Yes, obviously you have the Senegalese, you have the Malians, you have Guineans, and since the year 2000, you have Burkinabe, a strong presence of Burkinabe in Harlem. And you have Ivorians also in Harlem. So what attracted West Africans or Africans to Harlem is the perceived affinity to Blackness.
Okay.
Because for many of them, they were introduced to Harlem, or at least the idea or the image of Harlem already back home, either through jazz, for those who are older, through jazz, through the history of Malcolm X, who is, a revered figure on the continent. So you have the history and I don't say prestige and standing of Harlem as the global center of Black culture and politics. So coming in and also being Black, automatically thinking, Harlem is your place we should go, because Malcolm X really fought for Black people. And we know about jazz, and New York, we heard about Harlem. So it's that perceived affinity that's brought them to Harlem.
Yeah, that's true. And, it's a place whereby the connection with the Blackness is, like you said, is very, very important, because, from being able to connect, that's why many of these women are able to start their own small business in terms of hair braiding, because that's the place that they feel like, Black culture is, they could bring the culture with the musical instrument, including drums, African clothing, and all that stuff to bring it to Harlem. It's a cultural center. Thank you for that. So what would you say is the most fun part of writing this book?
I would say is trying to find my own voice. No, yes, because I will explain this. Because as academic, you are trained to avoid the I.
Okay.
This is basically the training. The I is a lot of subjectivity. So if you talk about subjectivity, there is no objectivity. So you should stay away from it. But in this book, I've tried as hard as I can, to use the I, to say, I'm not going to write myself out of this text.
Yes.
I'm part of this community. And if I haven't happened to be in Harlem, I don't think I would have written this book.
Yeah.
And also, in Harlem here, he has brought many things to the surface for me personally. Like personally, I don't think the question I would have asked about my own identity, my own Blackness, if I had not come into this space. No. But coming to this place, automatically the question that comes to your mind, and also as a Black person in America, it's like someone wrote that Blackness, it doesn't, in terms of system, the system doesn't ask if you are immigrant or you are African. No, you are just Black.
Black, yeah.
So for me, it's, finding my own voice and be able to talk about certain things from my own perspective, that in a purely academic book, would not allow me to do it.
I can't wait to read it. So how do you then, define yourself, your Blackness, that you discover? What was it like?
What I discovered is simply I'm Black, and it's something that I've never asked. As you may know, on the continent, we identify by ethnic groups. And when we come to the US by nationality, I'm Burkinabe, Nigerian, Ivorian, South Tanzanian, and then sometimes they say, well, you are African. So I'm like, okay, African, Black. So I'm like, the two now are the one that kind of interchange, because I know these are the ones that define me, and I don't feel boxed in. Because as in the book, in the introduction, I mentioned it, by the year 2075, every 1 person out of 3 would be African. So in less than 2 generations away, 1 person out of 3 in the world will be African. So happy to be one.
Yeah, we're people of African descent. The population is so, huge, but the whole power behind who controls the wealth of the world is, one thing that has to be debated. We have to challenge who controls the wealth of the world. So that's where the problem comes in. So what would you say is the hardest part of, the most difficult part of writing this book?
The difficult part, then maybe I will repeat myself, is to, getting to use the I. And second, I think I've been a little bit more freer to say certain things.
Okay.
That I felt that in other circumstances, I would not have been able to do it. I will take one example. There is a chapter in the book entitled Relations in Harlem Between Africans and African Americans. And this is a very touchy, like the 800 pound gorilla in the room, or the white elephant. Everybody, in the community talks about it, in groups, in family, in circles, but outside people don't want to talk about it. And yet it's something that somehow you have to address it. Yeah. Because for me, addressing it and also thinking of the larger conversation between Africa and the diaspora. Because the reality is, I don't think the conversation or the dialogue has really started. It has been cyclical. There are times where, I'll take one example, in the 60s, you have independence and freedom movements. So they came together, and civil rights movement came together, and then they will go apart. So, but something sustained and profound dialogue, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it hasn't been, I don't come across those kind of dialogue to talk about African immigrant experience and Black experience and combining our effort together to actually appreciate each other and, appreciate our differences and everything. Those kind of dialogue, like you said, has not been taking place. And we have to, it's like a big gorilla in the room. We have to actually bring it out and talk about it, because each part have some animosity towards one another.
Yes.
Without actually digging into where does this come from. Whereby sometimes we know is because of the larger power that is involved during, colonization and, the media, the European power, the American power that actually portray image of each other negatively towards one another. Because let me tell you, when I go to the African market, like I said, I could sit down there for hours. And many of the people who come there to shop, they have diversity of customers that come. They have African Americans, they have different people that comes over there to shop. But, some of the comment that you will hear from some customers is so demeaning. Just because somebody does not speak English does not mean they are illiterate. Because you find some of the traders, some of them went to school back home. But coming here to learn, they came from a country where they speak French. It's like I'm from Nigeria. If I have to go to France to go and live, I have to learn French or, French language, and then be able to adjust to that in order for me to go to college. So just because somebody does not speak English or have difficulties expressing themselves does not mean that they are ignorant or they are primitive or they are the set of people you could just talk to anyhow. So those dialogue has to take place.
Yes.
Like you said,
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's a very difficult part for me writing that chapter because I had to address certain things, and you always think that, okay, will there be blowback and people will, because the issue you're putting on the table that people they're all aware of it, but nobody want to touch the heart of the potato.
But we have to talk about it. Of course, we're all Black and we're all from the continent of Africa. The slavery took place, those are ancestors as well. Colonization took place for those who remain on the continent. So we have to talk about those differences, the misunderstanding between both. Because as an African immigrant, apart from being Black in America, you also struggle with so many things.
Yes.
The lack of family member who you left back home, you are left on your own to fend for yourself with your children without no limited community support, trying to navigate through the system, and you raising your children in the same environment as well. We have many of the parents who have to go to school to advocate for their children that they're scared to say.
Yes.
But back home, it was a different ball game. The teacher says something, you believe what the teacher says, and you could discipline your children and say, follow rules and all that stuff in school. But then you are not even sure whoever is complaining about your child, what they're actually saying, whether it's true or not, or they're just picking on them because of their identity. So a lot of all those conversations I know is something, but we have to talk about it. People are going to be upset. Africans will be upset. African American will be upset. Like I said, each group, we have biases. All of us as human beings have biases towards each other. Whether I'm going to have certain beliefs or thinking that I attach to people from Senegal. Senegalese might have something that they attach to the Nigerians. You understand what I'm saying? So all those things, but when your biases have to actually now affect the people's progress, whereby they've been mistreated or they've been looked at as others and they are not being given the opportunity that is due to them or their children, then we have to talk about it.
Yeah, that's been my challenge, but I'm like, okay, I put it out there, and I hope conversation, it will open avenues of conversation.
It's going to open up avenue of conversation, and we have to have that conversation. For me, I'm not shy away from it because it's part of the struggle that as an immigrant we go through. So what would you say are some of the challenges African immigrants face in Harlem and or throughout the New York during your research for this book?
I think the challenges for many, yes, you have the existential question of a daily survival question, trying to work 2-3 jobs and for bills that never stop coming. And also the mental and emotional stress from back home, be it family member or extended family member who are always asking for resource, for money. So we're caught between the representation of the media portrayal of America as a very rich country, that narrative, and them struggling to survive, to pay their own bills, and also to help their family. And maybe to invest a little bit, I don't know, buy a plot of land or build a duplex, which is very, difficult to attain. So they're caught with, in those three instances. So, and also you have, for New York particularly, New York can be very brutal, and is brutal. Not only you would think if you are a newcomer, New York is tougher on you, but actually even those New Yorkers who've been around for a while will tell that it doesn't relent. It keep coming. So you have a brutal part, but even one thing that's is kind of emotionally taxing for them is New York can make you anonymous. In the sense that if you take the larger immigration population in New York or Harlem, or you can even extend it for the US, usually those who are able to migrate to the US are those who already have certain means and they know how to navigate the system. So it's not like they're coming directly from a village. Very few. Means that they already have back home a status, a name or a job that they attach themselves to or they identify with. But you come to New York, if you were a medical doctor in your home country, guess what? The medical doctors in New York, you are not any special than them. Whatever you be, you are a university professor in your home country, you come to New York or even to this country, there are plenty, thousands of them. So whoever you are, so that falling into that anonymity for many also is taxing. So not only you have on the material part, providing for themselves and their families, but also trying to have that satisfaction that I'm somebody.
Yes.
And usually if I am somebody is linked to a job or profession as identity, and you cannot have that profession that you used to have home, that can be difficult for some to come to terms with.
Yeah, that's true. That is so true. Because even if you're a doctor back home, you still have to come here and take the exam, and that's if you pass it, then go through different channels in order for you to make, to get into the profession. And before then, you have to struggle through different channels of two different things as well. So I'm glad that you're able to explain that as well. So as an academia, would you like to share with our listeners some of other publications that you intend to work on, or you already have been published already?
I've already published 3 books, all are on African cinema. The first one is in French, so okay, so I will leave it that. So the second one is African film studies and introduction. Okay, it's this one. So and the third one is West African Screen Media. Comedy, TV series, and transnationalization.
Okay.
And I'm already working on the second edition of this, which
African Film Studies.
Yes, the second edition, as you submit the manuscript in 2 months.
Okay.
And next I'm working on it, like I said earlier at the beginning of our conversation, is my memoir. So I'm not famous, I'm not old enough to write memoir, but I wanted to talk my own trajectory in the US, living in different states, and what I've learned, what I've seen and experienced from an immigrant perspective.
Yes, that would be wonderful, because, we have to continue to tell our own stories, so that's very powerful. What perspective or belief do you intend to challenge with this book? And what would you like the readers to take away from it?
The takeaway for me is the larger conversation of you have globally the tightening of immigration. You have anti-immigration or migration rhetoric, and also the portrayal of immigrants as profiteers. But we know their contribution to the host country. And I was given earlier $55 billion that Sub-Saharan African immigrant contributed to the U.S. economy in 2015. Mm-hmm. So I don't have a number 7 years later, but that speaks for itself. I know that for some it's an emotional thing. So no matter how the evidence will not change, but I think it's our duty to present the case and also make another case that if we're contributing so much to the local economy and the national economy, maybe they should, immigrants themselves, they should work to defend their own interests. I don't know, should be through lobbying, could be in local politics or running for local office, could be municipal, could be state or national. Because until that happens, where you have presence in the decision-making circles, will be difficult. Politicians will only come to you at the election cycle.
Take pictures.
Yes. So for me, is to say, hey, immigrants are not profiteers, but also to ask immigrants to do the work, to build coalition, to defend their own interests, because nobody's going to make it for them. And second, I wanted also to, at the level of the neighborhood of Harlem, to complexify the narrative about Harlem. Yes, Harlem, it's in the Black neighborhoods, it's about African Americans, but you have also African communities that have been here for decades who have contributed to the neighborhood culturally and economically. Mm-hmm. And the stories need to be told, the stories need to be acknowledged, because they are part of the fabric of what Harlem is. And I said that they played a critical role in Harlem's most recent renaissance, because after what the Harlem Renaissance, we know that Harlem went into neglect, into complete neglect. So, yes. So the 80s and 90s, you see Africans start coming, and then automatically real estate will gradually start to appreciate, and the neighborhood adding to the culture, even bring more appeal to the neighborhood. And when I was doing the interviews on 116, one Senegalese was telling me that he's an electronics store, the owner. He told me that the year 2000, when he would order stuff in Midtown to have them delivered in Harlem, the delivery truck, the driver will refuse to come and say it's not safe. Mm-hmm. And he told me that the African cab drivers that usually maintain the link between Harlem, Uptown, and Lower Manhattan, because they're the one that accept to drive, taxis in the 90s and early 2000 when it was still perceived. So they have contributed, and they still contribute to the neighborhood that they inhabit and work in.
You are so right for saying that, because even Yellow Cab wasn't coming to Harlem. They were not coming to, and I have friends who are still living there now, like 110 on Adam Clayton Power. That building was drug infested. All those buildings around that time in the 80s and early 90s were drug, and even the Mayor Jenkins was asking people to come and buy the homes, to come and buy it for cheap. Some of the apartment buildings over there at that time, they're telling people to have ownership of their apartment. Mm-hmm. Many of those people that they were living there at that time, some of them are still there, but now that the value has risen, the real estate in Harlem is so high, many end up selling their apartment and moving away somewhere else, So I'm glad you're able to bring all those stories to the surface, because we have to talk about our own stories. And we have to educate Africans. How do you think we can talk to our African people how to advocate for themselves, to engage in public forum, to speak out for themselves? Because if you don't, nobody will speak out for you, because many other immigrants of color who are in this country, they engage in political battle, and sometimes they engage in political office to be able to win election, to contest for election, to do so many other things that they could do. So how do we motivate many members of our community that don't just allow somebody to come to your neighborhood when they need votes, to come and take pictures with you, without you actually understanding the unique need within your community? Maybe we're talking about language barrier. How can we have somebody who could have translation for African parents in different schools that their children are actually in? How can we create more jobs for some of these women? How can we have better health care for some of this family as well? So many of our community are struggling with understanding what their rights are and how to go about navigating through demanding those in the position of power and authority to provide those services for them.
Because once a concept that I've developed in the book, which is the visitor mentality. And I said, you have to do away with the visitor mentality, which basically is, I call it the delay investment in the host country.
I'm glad you're saying it. Please define what you're saying and spell it out so people will. I know where you're going with that. Please spell it out.
Yeah, so I call it in the book the visitor mentality, which is immigrants who come to this country and say, I'm here for, I'm here, for 5 years, and I will go back and, invest in, I don't know, stores or whatever business they want to invest in. But guess what? Initial is 5 years, 10 years we're here, 15 years we're here, 20 years we're here. And for some, they're married and we have children. And sadly, I say sadly, some still stuck on that idea that they don't even try to regularize the immigrant status, because always they've been on that idea that we're going back. You're not going back. Forget it. And whatever you think you left, if you go back to Africa, things change literally every month.
Yeah.
The business you think you're going to invest in is no longer, a viable option. For me, we have to do away with that, because there is no way you can be here just for 5 years and just pack up and leave. And so doing that. Second, in terms of empowerment, we have to go through financial education, not re-education. But for me, initially, we didn't even have it. We went to school back home to acquire certain competencies, but rarely be it at whatever is elementary, middle school, or high school, we're taught how to manage finances. No. So in the larger package of managing finances, I want to specifically look at how can you build intergenerational wealth.
Yeah.
Because here, those who are rich, or at least those considered who have wealth, either you are in the stock market, or you have a generation wealth through home ownership.
Yes.
Or you're going to be an entrepreneur and start something from scratch.
Yeah.
Those are the three avenues. So if you're not in the stock market, means that, okay, if you're working like all of us 9 to 5, being, having wealth that you can pass on to your children, going to be a tough one. And also home ownership. Home ownership rate among, at least people are interviewed, like I will take the concrete example of 116. All the Senegalese stores are interviewed on 116. I'm pretty sure I missed some, but I have not come across one single store owner who told me that they own the store. No. Some have been renting the same space for 30 years.
Yeah.
So for me, it's doing with the way of visitor mentality. And also we are in this country, if we're here to create better lives for ourselves and for our families, we have to understand how wealth creation and management work in this country. And third, it is community. How can we factor community into our own well-being?
Mm-hmm.
Because it may be contradictory that we are in a society where we consider everything is individualistic.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? If you dig deeper, you will understand that below the surface, those who get opportunities are those who are in networks.
Yes.
And networks means community.
Yes.
It may mean someone who looks and speaks like you, or may means otherwise.
Yeah.
I know sometimes for lack of mastery, if we don't master the English language or cultural codes, or doesn't have certain competencies, we tend to stick together because we're coming from the same country or from the same region. It comes a time where we have to break up, to go build other networks so that we can move up. That's why I'm talking about community.
Yeah. All these things that you lay down is so important because, like you said, many Africans, when they even have extra money, they rather invest it back home because they think they're still going back home to retire. So they're building houses back home, So when they finish, that's where they're going to retire. And I challenge many of them that I've come across. Even when I go to the African market, I say, what makes you think that's where you're going to retire? Whereby many countries may not have even the adequate health care that you need. You might have to come back, and stay here to take care of yourself because everything that you work for belongs here. Your insurance, everything that you work for, your health insurance that is going to cover you until you pass on is right here. Your social security, everything is right here. So when you are thinking that you're still going back there, that is where home is. Home is not where you have all your children. And there's no guarantee that all those houses you're building back home, those children are going there to claim because it's going to belong to family member and other people who didn't know how you sweat for that. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and it's part of that community conversation that we need to start having. And really, one thing I see, the Somali community, that they are in Minnesota.
Yes.
They are very powerful. That's why Oma, the congresswoman, became who she is today.
Yeah, because there is community.
Very strong in their community. And I like also what you said in terms of not only you're going to connect with Africans, you're going to connect with other group of people too. Because as a professor, you deal with different people from different backgrounds.
Yes.
In students as well as colleagues who are white, black, Asian, name it. But, how do we then motivate many of our people to navigate through those environments as well? It's a big challenge. Even those, apart from the language barrier, those who also came from English-speaking countries like Nigeria, is part of the conversation that I'm having with them. That English is not a barrier, but you still segregate yourself from other groups. You have to integrate yourself because these children are going to come out of school. They're going to work in different places. How would you want them to navigate when they are not even understanding? They are not being taught at home because you parents too, you don't have that kind of background to be able to help them through that. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. So are you planning on book signing or community discussion on this book? And if any, where are you planning on having the discussion?
Actually, I started a conversation yesterday with Africa Center. So I don't know how it's going to go. So I dropped the name. So we started a discussion and we'll see where it goes. So otherwise, yes.
Yeah, you also part of Fordham University, right?
They're the publisher. They're the one, Fordham University Press publishing the book.
Okay.
But definitely there is plans to have a book launch and invite the communities, and also beyond the book launch, I owe it to with different communities because I remember a Senegalese store owner on 116 told me one thing because he said, "Okay, I did the interview. That's what they told me, but I don't read English. The book has to be translated in French." I said, yes. I said, you know what? Because I want us to have a discussion in the community here in 168. I'm like, what about? He said, no, I want us to have a discussion about jom. Jom is a Senegalese word meaning dignity. And he said, we work really hard to be in this country and to have, what do you call it, papers. Mm-hmm. But look at our children. They're not as hungry as we are. And I think we need to have that conversation. So yeah, different generation, different perceived work ethics and ambition. So yeah, you have a book launch, but also for other communities.
Yes, I think it would be very great thing if you can actually have it even in Harlem right there. I don't know, from some of these stores and have a translator from English to French, for them to have that open dialogue about, what the book actually entails. So how can our listener get this book when it's released? And how can they connect with you online, whether through email or other way of connection?
The book, they don't need to wait for the release. They can pre-order the book.
Okay.
The book is already on Amazon.com. So if you type in Africans in Harlem and Untold New York Story, it comes up. Or if they type my name, Boukary Sawadogo, it comes up. And also another way is through the publisher's website, which is fordhampress.com, and automatically. They can connect with me on social media, on Instagram. My handle is Boukary776. And on Twitter, I just created an account for Africans in Harlem.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so it's Africans in Harlem. But on Twitter, it's Africans Harlem. So automatically, and I've started posting pictures and about African presence in Harlem.
Yes.
And by email also. So email, it will be long, but email it will be long.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming. Pansa continue to normalize conversation about importance of community engagement about African immigrant experience in America. As I always say, as we continue to publicly discuss difficult issues within our community, we're shredding away stigma that might associate with uncomfortable conversation. Thank you, Dr. Boukary Sawadogo, for coming to Pansa platform to discuss your new book on African immigrant experience and their contribution to Harlem. I'm looking forward to reading this book, and because I'm very passionate about immigrant stories and their resiliences when we come abroad. So thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pansa Live Podcast. We hope to have you back with us in the next episode as we continue to explore the nuances of the African immigrant experience. If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at talk@pansapansa.org. That is talk@pansapansa.org. And follow us on Instagram at pansa.pansaforum. Until next time, remember to spread kindness and love. Thank you and take care of yourselves.